welcome to Commander Central, episode 167. And today we're going to take a look at listener Sam Jolasic's Thada Adel Merfolk deck. I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.
And we are just flying with the two of us this week, Max. It's pilot and co-pilot with no navigator in back because Chris is still laid up.
It could be a bumpy ride, people.
It could be. He did get wheeled into the shop this week, though, and did manage to get a couple games in, so that was kind of cool.
Yes, it was.
And he was feeling a little bit better than he was the week before.
Cabin fever is setting in for him.
Yes, he did say, he's like, I need to get out of the house, at least once a week. It's kind of a production. It requires multiple people to get him out. And he wouldn't successfully probably be able to navigate the stairs into your basement to record. But
right.
he did get out of the house, so that was actually nice to see him.
It also didn't help we got another 6 inches of snow today.
We did, yes. Oh, yeah, he would absolutely be unable to get out today. So we've got a couple fun guests lined up for the rest of the way. And earlier this week, we got a nice assist from Zach over at Commander Social, so we appreciate that help, Zach. Joey teased me mercilessly on the EDH Recast, or a little bit on air, but like before the show, he was teasing me heavily about how I kept confusing Matt and Max on the show that Matt Morgan was on. And then promptly proceeded to do it like 3 times himself that we had to edit out of the EDH Recast.
Well, I can understand the confusion because, Matt is almost as attractive as I am.
Right. You guys look so similar.
He is like the me on steroids.
Kind of, actually. Yeah, a little bit. And you're both blonde. Okay, I could kind of see that.
Yeah.
Well, do we have any news here to talk about, Max? Anything special? We have some contests, I guess.
We do have a couple contests going on. Of course, for Twitter, we're giving away 3 packs of War the Spark because, I found a bundle hidden in my closet. So I figured let's crack that open and give them away.
That's a good idea.
And then for Patreon, we're giving away the rest of the bundle, so the other 7 packs.
All right. Very good. We will give the Twitter ones out to people that retweet your tweet that you send, correct?
Correct.
All right. Excellent. Other than that, we started to get a few Theros Underworld cards leaking out. Not even leaking, I should say. They have been slowly, intentionally previewed. We saw the new Elspeth. We saw the Buy a Box, which is an Athreos. We won't go into really detail on those, but spoiler season is back upon us after a couple months off.
Yes, it is. Cannot wait to dig into Theros. It's one of my favorite sets for EDH in the past, decade. Because, it feels like it was yesterday, but it was really like 4 years ago.
It was legitimately a long time ago. Well, it's one of those things, I remember when I first started playing, because I was playing mostly around Return to Ravnica. That's roughly when you started playing, Max.
Yep.
And something from, at that point in time, 6 years ago, seemed like forever ago. Way back in the olden days before I played 6 years ago. And there's plenty of players now who look back like, man, Theros, that's from the mystical land before time, way back before I played Magic. It seems like to new players the same way that something like, Time Spiral seemed to us back when we first started playing.
Yeah, for sure.
We're getting old, man.
Don't say that.
I'd also like to note that our friends over at MTG Lexicon are going to be doing a 24-hour Commander stream on Twitch TV on Saturday, December 21st, I believe. I'm going to be participating in that, although I don't know what window I'm going to be on. I can tweet that out as the times get closer, but I'm going to be playing at least a couple games on there so I can let everyone listening know exactly when I'm going to be on if you want to check that out. But I would absolutely give them a view. They do a really fantastic stream every Saturday, although it's, usually not 24 hours, but on this particular one, they are going all day. So tune in and check them out, and I will let you know when I'm going to be on playing some Commander. Okay, well, should we jump right into this deck tech?
Let's do it.
I always think that when I start doing prep for these, I'm always like, okay, do I have enough stuff to say to make a full show here? And I'm always worried I don't. And then we get to like the hour, 5-minute mark, and I'm like, we need to wrap this up. Apparently us just talking about decks isn't something that's really challenging when it comes to filling time.
It must mean we're pretty good at it.
It must mean something. So Sam writes in, hey guys, first I wanted to say that I'm a huge fan of the cast. The conversation style and the way the show flows perfectly captures 3 good friends talking about something they're passionate about, and it's what's keeping me coming back for more. Honestly, I even love the April Fool's episode because it had the same dynamic. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you very much, Sam. We appreciate that. That's kind of one of the things we were trying to go for, and I'm glad that we've actually succeeded in doing that. So thanks a lot.
Yes, thank you, Sam. Now down to the nitty-gritty, the normal questions we ask. So we always ask, what's your meta like? He says he plays in 2 playgroups, one being his LGS with a large diversity of decks ranging from precons all the way to CEDH. The other is a small group of friends, one of which has a battle box with 16 commander quarters decks, each with a budget of approximately $50 that he lets everybody use. The budget decks are actually pretty decent, though, and I would say range between power levels of 5 to 7. He says he originally built this mono blue Merfolk deck thinking he could spend whatever he wanted on it without outclassing the budget decks that his friends have, but just due to the limitations of Merfolk being really tiny. But over time, he's added more ways to consistently draw cards, and now the addition of Nykthos and Marrow Regery and any enter the battlefield draw effect like Kindred Discovery makes him infinite mana or draws his entire deck. He really likes the interaction, but now his deck is nearing more of a top of the budget and meta that he can't tune it much more without, in good conscience, without retiring it altogether.
Okay. That all makes sense. The goal, he says, the main goal of the deck is going to find a repeatable card draw effect and then drawing a bunch of Merfolk to buff each other and swing through for the combat win. Thada's main role in the deck is to come out early and hit anyone with an island to steal a Soul Ring or other cheap ramp to get him to the point where he can start churning through his deck. There are multiple copy effects for artifacts and enchantments to help even more with generating card advantage and get that snowball rolling. He likes how the deck performs, but he's definitely open to tuning it more and only playing it at his LGS. He would also be interested in card recommendations that are maybe not crazy powerful, but just have interesting or weird effects that synergize with the deck.
Some of the weaknesses of the deck, it folds pretty hard to board wipes when he can't find either Kindred Discovery, Vanquisher's Banner, or some other method of repeatable card draw. There are a few counters in the deck, and Paradoxical Outcome as a funny tech card against them, but this deck runs at either 0 or 100 depending on the card draw situation. In a similar vein, a well-timed Vandal Blast or Bane of Progress brings great sadness to his heart. A small note from Sam, he doesn't want to add any more counter magic to the deck, so the path to success lives in even more card draw or digging, possibly. And since Merfolk are small, combat win is sometimes difficult.
The budget, he has a cube that is honestly the main focus of his magic spending, but it hasn't stopped him from putting a fair bit into this deck. Because of this, he can probably only justify about $100 or so of upgrades, but no single card limit. And his restriction is no Rift because he doesn't like the card. Not for power level reasons, he just doesn't like it. And that's really it. Thanks a lot, and he hopes Chris's foot gets better soon.
Well, that is awesome.
Yeah, I like all of that. And, Mono Blue Merfolk, that's interesting. We have a budget cap here. He's just looking to do weird things and no Rift. That's all things we can work with. So first things first here, let's take a look at the commander. This is a Thada Adel deck, so that's mono blue. Thada Adel is a Merfolk rogue with Island Walk, and whenever Thada Adel Acquisitor deals combat damage to a player, search that player's library for an artifact card and exile it. Then that player shuffles his or her library, and until end of turn, you may play that card. So that's why he was mentioning stealing Soul Rings, because you can go grab a Soul Ring for cheap, go grab a Soul Ring and then cast it for cheap for just the 1 mana, and suddenly you're up. Grab everyone's Soul Ring pretty quickly. That always feels good. And I've seen a couple Thada Adel decks that's the main goal is to have like 6 Soul Rings in play or something, like take everyone's, copy everyone's, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
But the mono blue does keep that in check. I think one of the things we talked about, or you mentioned off the air, Max, was the possibility of changing up the deck color scheme.
Yes.
So why don't we just talk about that briefly first here?
Yeah. So, blue has issues with combat damage. He said it right in his notes to us. My thought when I was prepping for this show was, if you switch it to someone like Kumena, Tyrant of Orazka, you get the green in there. Doesn't mean you have to completely revamp this entire deck. You could probably take some of the artifacts in here that probably help him win. Take those out. You can replace them with a couple of the blue-green Merfolk that are either lords or help your other Merfolk get through. But the biggest thing is green opens you up to overruns. So all these 2/2s or 3/3s now become 6/6s with trample or 7/7s with trample, which might help the combat step, win that way. So you aren't just digging through your deck finding a way to win that way. It's another path to victory without maybe changing the deck a lot.
Yeah. I think if I was telling a new player to build a Merfolk deck, I would say just build Kumena, because the option to have those overruns as a win condition when you go wide with Merfolk is really simple. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean like it's something for a new player that's very intuitive. I've got a bunch of creatures that are going to get you huge and just stomp into people. If you're a newer player, that's a very easy thing to understand. And green and blue obviously synergize absurdly well together anyway. So that's something that if you're someone who's listening and like pondering a Merfolk deck and haven't played Merfolk before, or you don't want to deal with doing really complicated, infinite draw things, Kumena's great, and you will be able to build a relatively effective deck on a budget using those two colors. So I myself, I kind of like Thada Adel. At least I like because of the opposite reasons, right? We talked about how you have those win conditions baked in green with the overruns. This does force you to get a little more creative. And I think if you're somebody who's been playing for a few years, it's probably more challenging, I think, a little bit. And I like the challenge. So if that's something you're looking for, I do like having to go Thada Adel in mono blue. And in this case, there's a pretty limited amount of counterspells too. So you're on top of that, you're kind of handicapping yourself in terms of what blue's big strength is, which is something I respect. That's a kind of a fun thing to try to build around and make work as well. But I agree with you completely, Max. Green is monstrous compared to blue, and that would be something I would for sure at least consider.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's jump into this land base as it stands right now. 35 lands. There's only 23 islands and quite a few utility lands. You want to read the utility lands to us here?
Yeah, so we have a Ghost Quarter, a Halimar Depths, Inventor's Fair, Myriad Landscape, Mystic Sanctuary, Nykthos, Path of Ancestry, Reliquary Tower, Rogue's Passage, Scavenger Grounds, Teleria West, and Zephyrin Void.
So what do you think of that land base?
I like it. I think Myriad Landscape kind of jumps out at me just because it comes into play tapped, and you're only really netting one land off of it when you crack it. Right. But you're in mono blue, and it's one of your main sources of ramp, I guess. So in monocolor, I guess it works. I'm not a fan of that card. I've kind of been playing that card less and less.
I've moved away from it as well. If someone tells me they like it, if I had good luck with it, I will not argue because I've used it to find effect before as well. I just found that the amount of games that the ramp, the extra land there matters enough to offset it coming into play tapped. I just feel like it's kind of a wash, so I've just stopped running it. But if someone likes it, I don't think it's a bad card.
Right. I'll agree with that.
So let's start at the top here. Ghost Quarter as the land removal land. And I think that's the only one in the list here. Looks like it is. Zephyrin Void, I don't know if it's good enough to have in that slot over. Like, I feel like the amount of times that scry, and it's only one time, it scries when it comes into play, and that's it. The amount of times that matters over being able to destroy someone else's busted land. I would much rather have just a Tech Edge in that slot. What do you think?
Yeah, a Tech Edge or even a Field of Ruins, so you get to replace it. Sure.
Yeah, I would probably just run a land removal land. And maybe in that particular meta, it doesn't matter. But Void I get in some decks. Like if I was playing something that cared about the top deck and you wanted all the manipulation possible. But I just don't think it's that useful here over even another island.
Yeah.
In a mono blue deck where there are sometimes things that care about islands, I just don't know if Void does enough work.
Yeah.
So Halimar Depths, it comes into play tapped, but it does let you look at the top 3 cards of your library and put them back in any order. What are your thoughts on Halimar Depths?
In the decks I've ran it in the past, I really like it because I am looking for that early game Soul Ring or huge, powerful Mana Rock. It all kind of depends on how fast you want this deck to be. It doesn't sound like this has to be super fast. You know, he likes to get Thada Adel out early, but I don't think if you do turn 1 Halimar Depths, it's not going to hurt the deck. And later in the game, it might just find him the win condition or the card he's been looking for. So I actually like this way better than Void, in my opinion.
I tend to like it as well. And same thing with Inventor's Fair up next. This isn't obviously an Inventor's Fair deck, but it makes sense when you realize that he's stealing a lot of Mana Rocks, Soul Rings, probably taking Mana Crypts or Vaults if he sees them. So between the 14 artifacts that are already in the deck and taking other people's artifacts, it's probably pretty easy to hit the threshold where you can crack it to go then find more useful rocks, whether it's Cloudstone Curio to bounce stuff or Coat of Arms to basically win probably when you cast it. Makes sense here.
Yeah. This deck is running 14 artifacts, and we'll get to those later. So, Inventor's Fair, just based on his own deck, is probably going to be able to be used a lot, even with taking out Thada Adel out of the equation.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, even if you're not stealing Soul Rings, even if no one has islands and you're not getting through anywhere, you probably pretty frequently just accidentally hit it. I mean, your 14's enough, I think. Next, we've got Mystic Sanctuary, which we talked about a few shows ago as new card this year. I mean, there's enough instants and sorceries in this deck to make it worthwhile, probably. And as a mono blue deck, you're just gonna frequently have the islands without even trying to do so. So it's basically an island that comes into play and gives you the option to put a spell back on top of your library. There's just not much downside to that. Nykthos in a mono blue deck, yeah.
Yeah, in any monocolor deck, to be honest.
Yep. I mean, it was much easier to say that when it was $6 than it is when it's $24. But he has one clearly, so why not run it? Path of Ancestry, gives you the option to do a scry if you play a Merfolk, and there's a lot of Merfolk in this deck, so it comes into play tapped, but you're going to eventually, over the course of a game, get probably half a dozen scries out of it. That's pretty solid.
Oh, for sure.
Reliquary Tower, this is a heavy draw deck. He did say he does a lot of times kind of infinitely draw and do repeatable draw stuff. It's a good safety blanket card anyway. I'm a fan of it, even if it's not always necessary. Rogue's Passage pokes through some damage if someone has blockers up. You have Scavenger Grounds, which, Rogue's Passage, I should also note, is one more way to get through a Thada Adel to steal stuff if they don't have islands.
Correct.
Scavenger Grounds, obviously, we say it in every deck tech we do. If people don't have it, they should run it. Tillery West will go find whatever land you need. Then we mentioned Zalfir and Void. Are there any lands that aren't on this list that you think you would add?
Okay. I think Lotus Field would do really well in this deck.
Okay. Why Lotus Field?
So even though it enters the battlefield tapped, and you have to sacrifice 2 lands, you're making 3 blue mana.
Okay. Yeah.
The next turn. I think this is probably an okay substitution for Zalfir and Void.
Sure.
Just because, you can ditch 2 islands, after you tap your mana, cast a creature, and then play the Lotus Field, sacrifice those islands, and you're still up a mana the next turn. Plus, They can't destroy the Lotus Field, so it's always going to be there.
Right. Short of somebody casting Armageddon, it's just going to stick around for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that one would be fine. You could also... a terrain generator is a card I've had pretty good luck with in my monocolor decks, particularly mono blue, because you tend to draw a lot. You plenty of times leave up those 2 mana in case somebody does something you need to counter, and then, hey, I didn't need to spend it on a counterspell, so I'm just going to terrain generator and put this island into play.
Yeah.
I don't think it's amazing, but I think it's good enough, and I never regret running it in mono blue deck at all.
Yeah.
So that's another one that I would be tempted to replace Void with. I think it's just more often than not going to do work.
Yeah. I have a couple more suggestions.
Sure.
Since, like I mentioned, there are 14 artifacts in this deck, plus whatever he gets from Thada Adel, even though these won't really help with those, but adding maybe Academy Ruins or Buried Ruin to the deck just to recur, some of the more powerful artifacts in this deck would be nice to have.
Yeah, in one thing, like, for example, in my mono blue deck, I have a mono blue Talrand deck. I'm running a bunch of mana doublers. I have Gauntlet. I have Extraplanar Lens. I have a Caged Sun in there. I'm running High Tide. So for me, having a large amount of islands is relatively important. He's not doing that in this deck. So when you're at that point where you're not running those, you can get away with a lot of utility lands in a monocolor deck.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't want to run like half or anything, but like if you're running, a dozen utility lands out of your 35 or 36 lands, that's pretty safe to do, I think, in a monocolor deck that isn't worried about doubling mana. So yeah, you could very easily add a few more things there, and it just wouldn't probably phase you at all. Ancient Tomb, again, is one of those ones we also say too, if you're not running Ancient Tomb and you happen to have one lying around, like every deck is better with an Ancient Tomb, I think. So
I agree with that statement. I don't know if that card is really going to do a lot of work in this deck, though.
No, here's the thing with Ancient Tomb. If he had one in his binder, I would say put it in the deck. I don't think it would make this particular deck that much better. There's a lot of things that only cost, well, either have just have blue pips exclusively, or just cost a single colorless. So
right.
there's a lot of times I think Ancient Tomb wouldn't be that amazing here, but I think it would be, if you have one lying around, I would put it in the deck. I just don't think it's worth probably chasing one down. So we mentioned artifacts, Max. Why don't we jump over there and you can go over the 14 artifacts he has here.
Yeah, so there are 14 artifacts. There's Cloudstone Curio, Coat of Arms, Door of Destinies, Herald's Horn, Konda's Banner, Lightning Greaves, Mind Stone, Sapphire Medallion, Sky Diamond, Soul Ring, Swiftfoot Boots, Sword of the Animist, Vanquisher's Banner, and Vidalcan Shackles.
So nothing too crazy here, but it's actually a really solid package for what you would want in this deck. Cloudstone Curio is kind of a combo piece and is going to let you bounce Merfolk to replay Merfolk to do things that matter with that interaction. Coat of Arms, Door of Destinies, I mean, those are just ways to just mass buff your entire team for swinging in. Herald's Horn's a card that we've mentioned, I think, whenever we looked at a tribal deck, basically.
Yes.
And it's great. And it's $16, and there's a reason it's $16.
It's a $16 uncommon.
Yeah, and it's a great card. Konda's Banner, actually, I quite like here. It's, for those who don't remember, it's a legendary equipment out of Kamigawa block. It's 2 mana to cast and 2 to equip. It can only be attached to a legendary creature. Creatures that share a color with the equipped creature get +1/+1. Creatures that share a creature type with the equipped creature get +1/+1. So in this case, it's going to give all blue Merfolk, assuming he attached it to Thada Adel, which I think there's a couple targets in here. There's a Kapala, and I think, that's it. I think that's the only other legend. But either way, whichever one that gets attached to it's going to give all your creatures +1 for being Merfolk and +1 for being blue.
There's a few others, but we'll cover those when we get to creatures.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I see. No. But yeah, so I think if there's a deck to run this, it would be this one. 4 mana, though, to give your creatures +2/+2 is only okay. What do you think?
I think it is fine. If it didn't have that equipped to a legendary clause on it, I would be way happier with this card.
Yes.
Especially because there are only there's a handful of other legendaries that it can be equipped to in the deck. I guess it's better than like a sword of X and Y, though. Like, it's more unique, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's interesting here. The one other thing in a similar vein here that I would maybe consider is artifact out of M15 called Obelisk of Erd. It is 6 mana to cast, and you choose a creature type. Creatures you control the chosen type get +2/+2. So it's the same buff as Konda's Helm gives, but it does have Convoke. So if you have a couple of Merfolk out, you can tap them to knock that casting cost all the way down to nothing if you have 6. In which case, even if you have to tap 2 Merfolk to get it down to 4, while you're spending 2 to cast Konda's Banner and 2 to equip it, and then if somebody board wipes, you have to re-equip it again. Obelisk of Erd, I think this deck might find is more efficient, and could be way more efficient if you happen to have 6 bodies out that you aren't going to, do anything with that turn anyway. And then you don't have to re-equip it. It's just there all the time until someone removes it, versus having to deal with Konda's Banner having to be on one of your legends and then, spending 2 mana every time one of them dies or something. I don't know if I would necessarily make that switch, but I think it's one I would consider depending on how often you find yourself having to deal with re-equipping Konda's Banner.
Yeah.
Lightning Greaves are in here. Give haste and protect your commander. That makes sense. Mind Stone is just a good rock. Sapphire Medallion's a great rock in this kind of deck. Sky Diamond.
I don't like it.
So enters battlefield tapped to add blue to your mana pool. Because it comes into play tapped, that's I assume what you don't like about it.
That is correct.
Arcane Signet's out there.
Yeah, that's exactly what I would swap this for.
But worst case, there's Felwar Stone, which
right.
Also has a good chance of making your color. But like we said, in this kind of deck, you can completely get away with it only being a colorless source. Everflowing Chalice, for the same amount of mana is going to make you 1 colorless. And if you happen to have more mana than that free and don't need to do anything, you can cast it for 4 or 6 or 8 or whatever it is. So it will scale. I just think there's too many other options to run Sky Diamond.
I agree with that.
So Soul Ring, Swiftfoot Boots, Sword of the Animist. You don't have a lot of ways to ramp land in blue. This is one of them, so that makes sense. Vanquisher's Banner is similar to the Herald's Horn. It's a new artifact that is great in any kind of a tribal deck. And last name is Vidalcan Shackles. 3 mana, you may choose not to untap Shackles during your untap step, and you can spend 2 to gain control of target creature with power less than or equal to the number of islands you control. So it's just a really efficient artifact to run in any mono blue deck because you're usually going to have a pretty good amount of islands. It doesn't really do anything the deck is doing, but it's a solid enough card.
Yeah.
Any notes or anything there from you, Max?
I mainly don't like the Sky Diamond just because there are better options out there, like Arcane Signet, like you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, and a card that I'm running in my Talron deck that I think will be perfectly fine here as well. It's not a 2-drop rock like these. It's a 3-drop. But I've had really good luck with Heraldic Banner. That is the 3-drop. When you comes in play, you choose a color, and it just by default gives creatures of the chosen color +1/+0.
Is it creatures you control or all creatures?
Creatures you control of the chosen color.
Even better.
Yeah, so it's just your stuff. It just by default gives them that, and it's a mana rock. So it's not sitting there doing nothing. It's a 3-mana rock that busts your stuff.
Yeah.
And you're going to choose blue, so it's always going to make the color you need. That's one I would quite strongly consider. I've been very happy with it in my mono blue deck, which is a Drake token deck basically, but functionally, this is going to be a Merfolk deck that's going to also go wide, and I think it would be just as useful here. Artifact-wise, beyond that, that looks pretty similar to my artifact package in my mono blue deck. So,
before we move on, I have 2 other artifacts I think that might do well in this deck.
Sure.
The first is about making sure he can get the combat damage through, and that is something like Eldrazi Monument and or Akroma's Memorial. They are both, I understand, high casting cost artifacts, but Eldrazi Monument making all your merfolk flying and indestructible, you should be able to sacrifice one at every turn if you need to, just to keep the monument around. And Akroma's Memorial just giving everything tons of keywords and protection from red and black just seems really good.
They're both 2 more good Alpha Strike kind of artifacts that are then fetchable with the Inventor's Fair as well.
Yes. My final suggestion is actually a card, Dana, you talked about on our Throne of Eldraine update show, and that would be Midnight Clock.
Yeah.
It taps for blue mana, so right there, that's really good. It might be a good replacement for Sky Diamond. It lets you eventually reuse your graveyard and put it back into your deck along with your hand, and since this deck is really susceptible to board wipes, you need to be able to recycle your graveyard as much as possible.
Yes.
So being able to get those time counters onto Midnight Clock and then exile it and shuffle your hand and graveyard back into your library, you are essentially refilling up your gas tank. So you have a whole fresh, 90, 80 some cards, whatever you haven't put on the battlefield for lands that you can keep going while others don't get to.
Now, I will note this, after we did the show where I talked about it, I actually got burned by it this week. I cast it when I was at, I think, 2 cards in my hand, and then proceeded to top deck on the next 3 turns as it was ticking up. Top decked 3 draw spells, all of which I'm like, well, I might as well cast them because I had nothing in my hand. And so I drew a ton of, when it went off, I didn't want it to go off because I didn't want to have to shuffle my hand away.
No.
But I mean, still, I got 7 more cards. If that's the worst thing that happens, you're still doing okay. But yeah, that was the first time I was it was the perfect time to play it too. I'm at 2 cards in hand. I dropped Midnight Clock. I'm like, all right, I'm going to draw a full grip in 3 turns because the board state wasn't that advanced. It was on turn 4 or something. I'm like, all right, yeah, it's going to be select. And then proceeded to just draw spell, draw spell, draw spell. I'm like, oh, come on. I've got one more artifact I will just throw out there briefly as well, and that's Quicksilver Fountain. It's an artifact that turns people's lands into islands on each of their turns. Number 1, in mono blue decks, it tends to be just a generally good card because you don't care if your lands get turned into islands. It doesn't hurt you at all, really, and it tends to really hurt other people's decks quite badly. But there's a lot of added synergy here as well because Thada Adel has Island Walk, and it's just one more useful way to give them islands. So I thought I would mention that. It does kind of tend to draw some aggro. Whenever I've seen it cast, everyone immediately turns their attention on the person with the Quicksilver Fountain. But it's worth at least mentioning as an option. So let's hop over to enchantments, Max. You want to read them to us?
Yeah, we have 9 enchantments. We have Bident of Thassa, Coastal Piracy, Kindred Discovery, Leyline of Anticipation, Mirror Maid, Mystic Remora, Spreading Seas, Steel Enchantment, and Thassa, God of the Sea.
Those all look pretty good.
I 100% agree with that.
Thassa is a creature, but she's over here in the enchantments. But I mean, she isn't a merfolk, but she's a honorary merfolk, we'll say. Bident of Thassa and Coastal Piracy both draw you cards when you go wide. They're really good here. Kindred Discovery is a gross card. When it was released, and I remember us reading it being like, oh, that's going to be really good. It's significantly better than I thought, and I don't think I've ever seen Kindred Discovery come down and not just be stupid. So, do you have any decks that are running it? I don't think you do, Max. Do you?
No, I do not, because I don't have a tribal deck.
It's just bonkers.
Oh, I believe it.
I'm glad it's here, and again, it's one of those cards where you're like, it's $25 now, and there's a reason. Like that's not unfounded. It's that good.
Right.
Leyline of Anticipation is just almost always a useful card. Same with Mirror Maid. Mystic Remora is a great draw engine. Spreading Seas lets you get Thada Adel through. It's really efficient. Steel Enchantment. This is a card we don't see very often, but 2 mana to both take away someone's enchantment and give you one is almost never going to not be great. Particularly in mono blue, where you have no enchantment removal.
Yeah.
If the worst thing you do is steal someone's doubling season that you can't take advantage of, that's still worth 2 mana. Even if you don't get to use it yourself, but a lot of times you're going to be like, oh, someone just played a True Conviction. Yoink. So I think this is a good deck for a Steel Enchantment as well. Is there anything you'd add to this list or take out of it?
There is one I would add, and that would be, I would add Search for Azcanta.
Yeah.
Mainly, and I'm going to say this because I typically don't do it this way, for the land version, the Azcanta the Sunken Ruins. Getting this card to flip allows him to dig through his deck, and that's what he wants to do. He wants to dig down, find the one card he needs to win, and for 2 and a blue to look at the top 4 cards of your library and then reveal a non-creature, non-land from among them and put it in your hand, and the rest go on the bottom in any order. Yep. Is huge, I think, for this type of deck.
Yeah, it's a very solid card in any deck. This one especially, I think. The one enchantment recommendation I have is to address a problem he mentioned before, which is board wipes being an issue. The card that would deal with that in mono blue is Teferi's Veil. It's an old enchantment out of Weatherlight, 1 in a blue. Whenever any creature you control attack, it phases out at the end of combat. Once upon a time, the problem with Teferi's Veil and phasing in general was tokens that phased out they're just gone. That's no longer the case. When you phase out tokens, they come back into play after phasing's done. And this is a deck where, that's not going to entirely solve your problem from board wipes, but, 98% of board wipes occur at sorcery speed on someone else's turn, and the ability to have all of your attacking stuff just be not part of the game when that board wipe goes off is really useful, especially for something that only costs 2 mana to cast. I don't know if I would run it in, I'm not running it in my Sphinx deck, for example. Number one, I have, I think, 7 counterspells in that deck, so I do have answers to board wipes. I just very rarely have more than 2 creatures in play ever anyway. So it's not anything that's huge there, but I'm running it in my Talrand deck, which plays a lot like this one, I think, because being able to have those 9 Drakes be invulnerable basically after I attack is super useful. And I think I've been running Teferi's Veil in the deck for 6 months-ish, and every time that I've had it out and had a Drake army worth protecting, it's saved me in some way, shape, or form. It saved me from a board wipe, it saved me from someone stealing Talrand, it saved me from something by letting me make my stuff go away when combat's over. You're in blue where you don't have vigilance anyway. It's not like you're losing potential blockers. If your creatures are attacking, they're tapped. Most of them, there's some that do have passive abilities. So, if you have a creature out that didn't attack and your things like Grand Architect that buff stuff goes away because it phases out, well, your things that didn't phase out will lose the buff. But the amount of times it's going to hurt you is just nil, and it's going to save you from board wipes really frequently. So that's one I would strongly look at adding, and it's a cheap card. It's like $1. That was really all I had for enchantments.
Same here.
If this was a deck that was running Snowlands or something for extra planar lens, I have liked the Merit Age enchantment that was in
Mirrodin Besieged.
No, the one where if you have 10 or more snow permanents, you make the Merit Age token. Merit Age is Slumber. Number one, you scry whenever a snow permanent comes into play, and if you control 10 or more, you make a Merit Age. If this was a deck where you were just running Snowlands for an extra planar lens or something, then there's not much downside to Merit Age of Slumber, because sometimes you're just going to drop it in play and you'll do some scrying and then accidentally just make a giant 20/20, but you're not running Snowlands. If that was something you switch to down the road, I would say take a look at that, but I don't think it's worth making the switch to Snowlands just to run that card. So that's it for me. Is that it for you, Max?
That's it for me.
All right. Well, let's pop on over to the sorcery column, because there's only 5 of them here. There's Chart of Course, there's Curse of the Swine, there's Drawn from Dreams, there's Fabricate, and there's Rite of Replication. Chart of Course, we are big fans of that in this show. Curse of the Swine is one that we've, I think, become less of a fan of, but you are in mono blue with limited removal options, so I do get it. Drawn from Dreams is a new card. Look at the top 7 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand, the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. So that's another way to dig down. There's a Fabricate, lets you get an artifact, and there is Rite of Application, which obviously is a way to make a token copy of a thing, or make 5 token copies of a thing if you kick it.
Yep.
What are you thinking here?
I have a few suggestions.
Okay.
So Sam said he doesn't want to run Rift, which I understand. So I found some Rift replacements.
All right.
So the first one being Flood of Tears, which is a sorcery out of M20. It's 4 blue. You return all non-land permanents to their owner's hands. If you return 4 or more non-token permanents that you control, this way you may put a permanent from your hand onto the battlefield. So it's a nice way to, attack, cast this, bring all your stuff back, and then you return 4 things and put Thada Adel right back down.
And ideally, the permanent you put back down is Omniscience. But that's not in the stack. And
I was going to wait, we just did enchantments.
Right. That's a little magical Christmas land anyway, but yes. Did you have any more pseudo rifts you would run here?
Not pseudo rifts, but I do have other sorceries.
There's two more that you could consider if you wanted the effect. I've had good luck with Inundate in the past. It is 6 mana, but it returns all non-blue creatures to their owner's hands. So it's just never going to touch you, and it's going to bounce. There are games when you look around and you're like, oh man, there's just a lot of blue stuff out, and it's not going to do much. But the amount of games that has ever happened to me is pretty slim. There's a lot more games where you just devastate everyone else's board and touch none of your stuff. So that's a card I like quite a bit in mono blue. And there's another oldie that's even older than Inundate, and that's Washout. And return all permanents of the color of your choice to their owner's hand. That one's only 4 mana. And again, you're just, you're not going to choose blue. You're going to choose every color that isn't blue. And it's going to almost always hurt everyone else more than it hurts you.
Yeah.
And there will be a shocking amount of times, too, when you name black and you're playing against a mono black deck and a Golgari deck and a, Orzhov deck or something, where you just happen to catch 3 colors in the overlap between all 3 players and hit them all super hard and don't touch any of your stuff. So I've had really good luck with Washout as well. That's something that you could consider.
Yeah.
One more just general sorcery here I would mention that I've had good luck with is Distant Melody. Choose a creature type and draw a card for each permanent you control of that type. In a Merfolk deck and a deck that does have the ability to make some tokens, that can be pretty good. For the most part, Bident is in Coastal Piracy, and Kinder Discovery will draw you more cards, but there's times when you just want that fistful of cards right now, and it's something that I've had pretty good luck with. How about you, Max?
I have 2 others to recommend here.
Sure.
The first is going to go along the lines of the Quicksilver Fountain you mentioned during the artifact section.
Yeah.
And that's Aquitect's Will. It's a single blue for a tribal sorcery merfolk. And it says, put a flood counter on target land. That land is an island in addition to other types for as long as it has the flood counter on it. And if you control merfolk, you draw a card. So it replaces itself pretty easily in this deck, and it's only a single blue. And It enables you to enable Island Walk for the rest of your team on someone who might not be playing blue.
Replacing itself is huge. It's the same speed as Spreading Seas, and it's tougher for them to deal with for the most part.
Yes. My final one has to do with helping the combat step. So this is Open into Wonder. It's X blue for a sorcery from Amonkhet. X target creatures can't be blocked this turn, and then until end of turn, those creatures gain whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, draw a card. So it's doing 2 things. It's getting a handful of his merfolk through,
yes,
and he's drawing cards off of it. On top of having the Bident or Coastal Piracy out, you're just more card draw.
Yeah, that's solid. I have 2 cards that I don't think I would run here, but I do want to mention them. And they're ones that I run in my mono blue deck, and that's Retraced Image and Metotic Manipulation. And I'll read them both because they're both pretty obscure. Metotic Manipulation is double blue and a colorless, so 3. Look at the top 7 cards of your library, and you may put one of those cards onto the battlefield if it has the same name as a permanent you control. Put the rest in the bottom of your library in any order. So you're going to dig down 7 deep, grab an island, and put it into play. And it doesn't say tapped either, so it comes into play untapped. I've never, ever missed with it. I mean, technically you could not have an island in the next 7 cards, but I've never had that happen. In my Talran deck, too, it makes me a Drake, so I think it's a better card there than it would be here, because here it would just ramp you a land. But still, ramping a land in mono blue and have that land dodge when someone plays a Bane of Progress for ramp, that's not terrible. I don't think I would run it here like I do in Talran, but it's a card I wanted to mention because I think people don't realize the fact that it's just land ramp in blue. The other one, Retraced Image, is a single blue to cast, and it just says reveal a card in your hand and put that card into play if it has the same name as a permanent in play. So number one, maybe you draw your Soul Ring later on, and it just basically lets you, play your Soul Ring. I guess I don't know what that would accomplish because it's still 1 mana. But the main reason I use it again is you name a land, name your island, and then just play an island. It lets you basically ramp an island for 1 blue mana. It makes me a Drake and Talrand, and it wouldn't do that here, but it does give you a way to ramp an extra land into play in a color that doesn't normally get to do that. So I don't think in this deck you definitely probably don't want Retraced Image, but I think Manipulation is not a bad card, even if it isn't making you a thing for casting a spell. I think 3 mana to dig down 7 and put a land into play in a color that isn't green is pretty solid. So I will mention that at least as something to consider if you are looking to diversify outside of Artifact Ramp just a little bit. We have 12 instants here. A couple of counterspells, Arcane Denial and Counterspell. There's also Muddled Mixture, which gives you the option to use it as a tutor. And there is Swan Song as well. So those are really efficient counterspells. There's an Evacuation as a mass bounce. There's Factor Fiction as an instant speed draw. There's a Long-Term Plans, which I think is a card people don't see very often. It's 2 and a blue. Search your library for a card, shuffle your library, and put that card 3rd from the top. So you don't have to reveal it, which is unusual in blue. It doesn't have to be an instant or sorcery. It's just a card. That's pretty useful most of the time. There's Paradoxical Outcome. Return any number of target non-land, non-token permanents to their owner's hand and draw a card for each one. There is Pongify, Rapid Hybridization, and Reality Shift, which is the holy trinity of blue targeted creature removal. And last but not least, Whir of Invention, which goes and gets whatever artifact he presumably needs to probably Alpha Strike and win.
Yeah.
What do you think here, Max?
So I like everything here. My first thoughts went straight to how do we play Rift without playing Rift again?
Sure.
So I went straight to Aether Spouts and Aether Eyes. They're just nice little protect yourself cards, return all attacking creatures, or Aether Spouts, I believe, puts them on the top or bottom of their controller's library.
Either of which is a terrible choice to have to make.
Yes.
That's a lose-lose no matter what the situation is.
Yeah. My final thought in the instance was, since if he gets this draw engine online, my idea would be put a High Tide in here. That one turn of casting High Tide and being able to play a Merfolk, draw a card, play a Merfolk, draw a card, you have all this mana plus Nykthos. It seems kind of, maybe that's the card that just puts this deck over the edge. I'm running High Tide in my mono blue deck, and I'm not abusing it. I don't have a Isochron Scepter or anything to put it underneath. I just use it for a big turn. Like, hey, it's turn 7 and I draw a High Tide. Well, I'm going to make an extra 6 mana this turn and cast 3 extra spells off that. Even without abusing it, I do think High Tide's really good. Yeah.
Not that that's a secret. I mean, it's literally a deck in, I think, Legacy. But I think it's worth considering. Yeah, I'd really strongly think about High Tide for sure. Other than that, man, I like Polymorphous Jest in general. It's a kind of, it's blue sudden spoiling, and it's not as good as sudden spoiling, but it's still really good.
Yeah.
And it's cheaper than Aether Eyes or Aether Spouts. I don't think it is a little different. It's not an exact comparison, but like it's a similar thing in that kind of a package as a combat trick. It can kind of be a pseudo fog. It can kind of, deal with somebody's indestructible stuff. It can knock down flyers that are swinging through at you that you can't block, that kind of thing. It's just generally a useful card, and it's one that if I'm building a blue deck, it's going in my rough draft at the very least. So doesn't always make the cut, but it's really, really solid. What do you think of the Counterspell package?
It's what I would run.
Man, those are probably the first ones I put in a deck. Arcane Denial, Counterspell, Muddled Mixture, particularly because it lets you tutor stuff up, Swan Song. That's pretty close to the first 4 I'm running. I mean, if I happen to have a mana drain lying around, which I don't, but like if I got one in a Christmas stocking or something, I would put that in the deck. But like, you wouldn't probably go spend $100 and some on one.
Probably. Typically, like, Muddle isn't in my top 4, but I get that it can go get a lot of stuff in this deck, which is huge.
Yeah. One of the strengths of Muddle, though, is it can go get Rift, and you're not doing that here.
No, but it can go get a bunch of stuff in this deck.
Yes, for sure.
I mean, I'm fine with it. My go-to, unlike not mana drain, my go-to is always like Pact and Negation. I always like running Pact in my blue decks.
It's nice to have the one answer that you can use when you're tapped out.
And it's reasonably affordable with all the reprints.
Yeah, it's gotten way better than it once was.
I mean, it's $15, so I mean, it's pretty cheap.
Yep. Last but not least, there's 23 creatures in this deck. We don't need to go over all of them. They're mostly merfolk. When I was mentioning legendary ones, I did miss 2 before. There's an Empress Galena and there's an Emery Lurker of the Loch in here. But it's a lot of things that are just universally useful, whether things that give, +1 counters, or just generally buff things +1/+1, or give merfolk an ability. Most of them interact in some way with your creatures.
Yeah. The big thing with going with mono blue merfolk versus like the green blue merfolk that we saw in Ixalan is a lot of these don't make tokens, where a lot of the Simic ones make the tokens, which would help. If you ever wanted to go the Simic route, you'd build a bigger board state faster. But yeah, like you said, there's a few others that aren't merfolk. There's a Clever Impersonator in here. There's a Grand Architect because of all the artifacts. Plus, it's a Lord for all the creatures because they're blue. I mean, I sat there today in my office trying to find a better merfolk than what he's running in mono blue, and I couldn't.
No, I did the same thing. I brought up my list from Skyfall and did a search for just only blue merfolk, and I was like, man, that's roughly the list I would run of merfolk here.
Yeah.
So we tend to usually actually do creatures last for whatever reason, but like I intentionally did creatures last today because I was like, I don't know what I would change there.
No, I'm in the same spot. I don't know what else I would run in here for mono blue merfolk that he's not already running.
The one thing I would say is great as True Name Nemesis is in some formats. I think it's only okay here. So like if I was making a cut for something else that was super impactful, I would have no problem pulling True Name Nemesis, because it's one of those cards that tends to be really difficult for one person, but no one else cares about it. And the one person that does care about it, it's only dealing 3 damage a turn. Okay, somebody there's a few lords out and it's dealing 6 damage a turn. That still gives them a couple of turns to deal with that and find a mass bounce spell or find a board wipe or find whatever. That isn't the case necessarily in the other formats where it's ran, but like with 40 life and Commander, it's much easier to survive that True Name Nemesis, and the other 2 players don't care. It's never going to hurt them. So it's a neat card, but I think actually that might be one of the weakest ones here.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I guess, the last thing we can look at, there is one Planeswalker in here.
Good, because I have a suggestion.
Okay. What's your suggestion?
So the one Planeswalker in the deck is Ugin the Ineffable.
Yes.
He's using it for the draw. He has to be.
Yep.
Because there are 14 artifacts which will get the reduction, and the artifacts you might steal from Thada, so I get it.
His -3 does let you destroy permanents in a way that you sometimes struggle with in mono blue.
Yeah.
So it does do a couple things that you can use here. It's drawing you spells. It's making your artifacts cost a little bit less, and it does give you that kind of option to destroy a thing. But
so the one I'm going to recommend, and I'm actually going to give Chris 100% the credit for this because I saw him play this card this past week, and it is Jace, Ingenious Mind Mage. So this is the intro deck Jace from Ixalan block.
Oh, really?
It's 4 blue. And he has 3 abilities. He comes in with 5 loyalty. The first one is +1 draw card. Big whoop.
Right.
The -9 is gain control of up to 3 target creatures. Again, so big whoop.
If you get there, you get there. If you don't, you don't. There.
His second +1 is what really broke my back playing against Chris in his Persistent Petitioners deck. Untap all creatures you control.
Yeah, that's solid.
So when you go for that Alpha Strike or swing in with 4 or 5 creatures, You can drop this and untap them all so you have pseudo-vigilance.
And there are other ways to untap your creatures, but this is on a basically attackable enchantment that when you're not using that ability, it still draws you a card. Yeah, I like it.
I mean, he is 6 mana.
Yeah.
So is Ugin, but I feel like that's not going to be a problem once you get Nykthos and a few permanents down on the battlefield.
Use that high tide mana.
Exactly.
All right. That is all I've got here.
Yeah, I'm good as well.
Okay. So what'd you think?
I think this deck is awesome. I haven't seen a mono blue Merfolk deck in quite a while. In fact, I really even haven't seen a blue-green Merfolk deck since, Kumena came out, someone built it, and it was trash, and they tore it apart the next week.
I've seen a few Thada Adel decks, but they always have tended to be just kind of a good stuff or steal stuff theme. I don't think I've ever seen a Thada Adel Merfolk deck before.
Right.
So I like it. I'm always kind of a fan for something I haven't seen before, something offbeat, and I think this definitely kind of does hit that. Yeah, I'm a fan. All right. Well, I hope some of that was useful. It was a fun deck to look at for sure. And we do really appreciate, Sam, you taking the time to share this with us and for supporting us on Patreon. That's a huge deal, and it's what helps us. It's what allows this show to function and pay the bills and keep the lights on and keep Max in pants. So
wait, was I supposed to wear those today? I'm alone in the dungeon. So.
You're alone by yourself, so pants are optional. Although, let's be honest, pants are always optional.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you all very much. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, all our supporters out there. We will be back next Monday. Our podcast theme is Retro Future Dirty by Kevin MacLeod, licensed via Creative Commons. Our show is edited by Ken Petto. You can find him on Twitter at LOAD3R. You can find me on Twitter at Dana Roach. You can find Max at CMDR_Max. And you can find Chris at WiseSquishy1. We'll be back next week. Until then, I'm Dana.
And I'm Max.